Hello friends, in this INR number 22, I am going to tell you about the basics of the basal ganglia, which is again a very important topic for our exam, right? So what is the basics of the basal ganglia? Basal ganglia is a cluster of subcortical nuclei. Remember, it is cluster of subcortical nuclei which will be deep to the cerebral hemisphere, right? So these are cluster of the nuclei. You can see these are the cluster of nuclei deep to the cerebral hemisphere, right? What are these nuclei? They are consisting of four things: corpus striatum, lentiform nucleus, subthalamic nucleus, and substantia nigra. So these are the four important things. Now we will see what is corpus striatum. Corpus striatum will be containing two important things, right? Putamen nucleus and caudate nucleus. So putamen nucleus is basically putamen. Remember, putamen M for motor work, right? Caudate C for cognitive, right? So corpus striatum is containing two things: putamen and caudate nucleus. So now you can see caudate nucleus is here. So this is caudate and this is putamen. So putamen and caudate, these two things are together forming corpus striatum, right? Now we will see who is forming the lentiform nucleus. Lentiform means lens like, right? They should be looking like a lens. So what they will be containing? They will be containing putamen and globus pallidus. So in globus pallidus there are two parts: one is externa, one is interna. So now you can see that this is looking like a lens, this is looking like a lens. So this is the lentiform. So in lentiform, what are the two things? You can see the outermost one is the putamen and the inner one is the globus pallidus, right? So you can see this is the putamen and this is the globus pallidus. In globus pallidus also, the internal one is called as globus pallidus interna and external one is called as globus pallidus externa, right? So this is how we can understand. So this is lentiform because of lens like. So who is like a lens? Globus pallidus and putamen, right? Third one is below the thalamus, that is why subthalamic. So you can see this is the thalamus, and below the thalamus what nucleus we are seeing is subthalamic nuclei, and below that there is a, below the subthalamic nuclei there are substantia nigra, right? So these are the structures of the basal ganglia which is deep into the cerebral hemisphere, right? We can see that these are subcortical nuclei. So what is the function of this basal ganglia, right? The basal ganglia basic function is voluntary movements and adjusting the posture. Voluntary movements and adjusting the posture, these are the important function of the basal ganglia. So now we are going to discuss about the direct and indirect pathway of the basal ganglia. So direct pathway is usually excitatory, indirect pathway is usually inhibitory. So direct pathway will initiate the movements and indirect pathway will be inhibiting the movements, right? So what happens in direct pathway? One by one we will see. So direct pathway is also called as excitatory pathway because it will increase the movement, right? What happens here? Cortical input via glutamate will stimulate the striatum, and when striatum is stimulated they will release the GABA. So now you can see here it's a motor cortex. So motor cortex will increase the level of glutamate. See, the green color is shown for glutamate and green color is for excitation, right? So glutamate is for excitation. Red color, whatever I'm going to show you here, is GABA, and GABA is for inhibition. You got it? So green glutamate is excitatory, red GABA is inhibitory. So what we are seeing, that motor cortex has been activated. When they are activated, they will release glutamate. Glutamase is activator, right? So they will activate the striatum. So they will activate the striatum. Striatum has been activated. So what will now? Striatum will release the GABA. And what is GABA? GABA is inhibitory. So GABA will inhibit the globus pallidus interna, right? So now whatever GABA has been released from the striatum, whatever striatum is releasing the GABA, they are going to inhibit the globus pallidus interna, right? So now we can see that this GABA will inhibit globus pallidus interna, and thereafter there will be no GABA release from the GPI. You understand? Striatum has released the GABA, GABA has inhibited the GPI. If GPI is inhibited, what will happen? There will be no release of the GABA. So if there is no release of GABA, what will happen to the thalamus? thalamus is not going to get inhibited, because what is the function of the GABA? GABA function was to inhibit the thalamus. Now thalamus is not inhibited. So if thalamus is not inhibited, what will happen? This thalamus which is activated, in other words, this thalamus which has been activated, now this will activate, or this will send signal for the movement to the motor cortex, and this will activate the motor cortex, and they will be having initiation of the movement, right? So that is what I am showing you here. This will activate the thalamus, and this will lead into the movement. So that is direct pathway. Now look at the indirect pathway on this side. Why it is indirect pathway? Because here cortical input will stimulate striatum to release the GABA, same like the direct pathway. Motor cortex is releasing the excitatory glutamate. Glutamate will be activating the striatum, right? And as a result, now striatum will be releasing GABA, right? As we know that GABA is inhibitory. So this GABA which is activated, which has been released from the striatum, they will inhibit globus pallidus externa, right? So globus pallidus externa, now they are inhibiting globus pallidus externa. When globus pallidus externa is inhibited, what was the basic function of the globus pallidus externa? To release GABA and to inhibit the subthalamic nuclei, right? Basic function was GABA, GP is to release GABA and inhibit subthalamic. But what is happening? GABA is inhibiting globus pallidus. If globus pallidus is inhibited, so do you think that GABA will be released? So there is no GABA release, right? Now understand? Because this striatal GABA has inhibited the externa, and if externa has been inhibited, so there will be no GABA release. If there is no GABA release, so what will happen? Subthalamic nucleus will be not inhibited. Now you understand? Subthalamic nucleus will be not inhibited, and as a result, they will be releasing excitatory neurotransmitter. So subthalamic nucleus will be releasing glutamate. Glutamate will be activating the JPI, and this GPI, now listen to me very carefully. Subthalamic nucleus excitatory glutamate will activate the GPI, and this activated GPI will release the GABA, right? That is why it is indirect pathway. So if they are releasing the GABA, so GABA will inhibit the thalamus. If thalamus is inhibited, so this pathway will not be going, and there will be no movement. So prevention of the movement will be there, right? So that is what indirect pathway says, that, right? Cortical input will stimulate the striatum to release the GABA, right? Cortical input will release the glutamate, it will activate the GABA, it will activate the striatum will be releasing GABA, and this inhibit globus pallidus externa, right? So this will inhibit globus pallidus externa, and what will happen? This will activate the subthalamic nucleus, because they have been inhibited, so it is activated, and subthalamic nucleus will be releasing the glutamate, and this glutamate will stimulate the globus pallidus interna to release the GABA. So that is why they are releasing the GABA, and this will inhibit the thalamus, and that is why there will be no movement, right? So these are the direct pathway and indirect pathway. So direct pathway is activating the movement, indirect pathway is inhibiting the movement. But when we talk about dopamine, dopamine is released from this substantia nigra compacta. So now you can see dopamine is released from this substantia nigra compacta. So they will have two action. In direct pathway, they will combine with excitatory D1 receptor, and they will excite the direct pathway, means they will increase the movement. You understand? So now you can see they will increase the movement by combining with D1 receptor. But when they are releasing from the substantia nigra and they are combining with D2 receptor, remember, it is excitatory with D1 receptor. One will excite, two will inhibit. So 2 will inhibit. So when dopamine is released from the 2, they will be inhibitory in action. They will combine with D2, they will inhibit the striatum. And if it is inhibited, so obviously this all will be inhibited, and finally this will be also inhibited, and this thalamus will be increasing the movement. So what I am saying, dopamine from substantia nigra will cause increased motion. You understand? It will cause increased motion. How? By stimulating the direct pathway by binding to the D1 receptor. As I said, they will bind with D1 receptor and they will activate the direct pathway, or by inhibiting the indirect pathway. So, or by inhibiting the indirect pathway by combining with D2 receptors. So they will inhibit them by combining this, by inhibiting this pathway. So what will happen? This will be gone, right? If this is gone, then what will happen? Thalamus will be activated, right? So that is what it is, inhibiting the indirect pathway by binding to the D2 receptor. So these are the basic structure and function of the basal ganglia pathway. Next I will discuss about the lesion and the movement disorder associated with basal ganglia. Keep revising this topic. Best wishes for your exam.